William Cullen Bryant was an American romantic poet from the 1800s. He has a poem, Green River, that begins with this line, "When the breezes are soft and the skies are fair, I steal an hour away from study and care and hie me away to the woodland scene." I stole more than an hour. I had a whole day. Friday afternoon, I did hie me and my family away to the wilderness for some soft breeze and woodland scene, for some relief of the kind only wild places can give. Yesterday, I was up at Camp Unirondack, our Unitarian Universalist camp and conference center in the forever wild forests of the western Adirondack Mountains. Unirondack is one of the sacred locations of my youth. I attended summer camp every year for many, many years leading up to the summer in which I was old enough to work up there for an entire summer as a counselor. I returned 10 years after that summer to work 2 years in a row as the camp chaplain while I was finishing seminary. That was when my older 2 children first experienced Unirondack. And they also have kept a close connection to that location over the years. And my family connection extends further. My mother attended Unirondack as a youth. Indeed, she was a camper the first year they opened in 1951. As an adult, she offered programs and served on the board. And stretching in the other generation, we brought our granddaughter up there for her first visit this weekend, just a little over half a year old. Unirondack has been a sacred place for me, not just during my youth, but all of my life. Do you have a place? Perhaps a wilderness, or perhaps a garden, or a patch of nature upon which you can rely? Do you have a quiet place, such as we heard about in the story this morning? Bryant's poem concludes with the line, "I often come to this quiet place to breathe the air that ruffles the face and gaze upon thee in silent dream, for in thy lonely and lovely stream our images of that calm life appears, that won my heart in greener years." Wilderness is a significantly important part of being human, because as natural creatures, we need nature to help us stay balanced and in touch with our spiritual root. That is my experience of nature and wilderness. It's a touchstone back to balance for me, a taproot for spiritual health, and a resource of relief for my spirit. Wild places are necessary, for if we do not seek out wild places in nature, then we will not learn the gift they have to offer to the wild places in our hearts, and we will starve a sacred and necessary aspect of our lives for want of wilderness. Attending Sunday morning worship is important, to be sure. I'm never going to not say that. It helps us stay balanced in community. But we also need retreats, such as up at this wilderness camp, to experience the transformative and identity-shaping possibilities. Hie yourself to the woods from time to time to renew yourself in spirit and grow more whole. There's a wonderful misquotation of Thoreau that says, "In wilderness is the salvation of the world." It comes from that great naturalist Aldo Leopold in his book, The Sand County Almanac. In it, Leopold writes, "Perhaps this is behind Thoreau's dictum, 'In wilderness is the salvation of the world.'" The line comes in exactly my favorite part of that book. Aldo Leopold's conversion story after killing a wolf and realizing the deep interconnectedness of the mountain and the wolf and the deer and the men, Leopold realizes that to survive, we would need to learn to think like a mountain, he says. He realized that we humans must learn to see ourselves not as separate from the earth and other animals, that the wild places need not be tamed. They are necessary, and we can learn from them. Perhaps this is behind Thoreau's dictum, he wrote. In wilderness is the salvation of the world. Except Henry David Thoreau never said that. At least not exactly that. The correct quotation comes from Thoreau's essay, Walking. He says, "The West, of which I speak, is but another name for the wild, and what I have been preparing to say is that in wilderness is the preservation of the world." He had not said salvation. He said preservation. And in wilderness is the preservation of the world. Preservation is different from salvation. It's similar, to be sure. They both carry a tone of being whole. Salvation and preservation each signal a sense of a goal, both secure and sound. But while salvation rescues and restores that which is unsound back to soundness, that which is broken back into wholeness, preservation maintains and safeguards that wholeness that already exists, isn't broken or lost. Sometimes I find myself agreeing with Thoreau, and other times I agree with Leopold. I'm not always sure. Sometimes I think salvation is not what's needed. There's nothing fallen or lost or broken. It's all held in the beauty, and we need only turn and notice it. It's always been there. But other times I think the world has gone mad, and there is so much destruction and violence that we pour out onto each other and onto the world that perhaps preservation is not enough. The major environmental issues are not wilderness conservation and the protection of endangered species. Today, the issues are about climate crisis, deep concern for the harm that could well be irreparable for the world as we know it. Now, whether wilderness is the preservation or the salvation of the world perhaps depends on what you see going on in the world. But either way, it is wilderness that is needed. For if we do not have the experience of the wild places in nature, then we will not learn the gift that they have to offer to the wild places in our hearts. Those who cry out against this environmental crisis we are in are invariably those who have felt that touch of nature, who have had their hearts won by nature, as Brand had said it. In various religious scripture and poetry and folklore, we find references to the natural world as a place to uncover lessons for our living. Sometimes explicitly as a place of testing. Nature is sometimes cast as the place of temptation or a place where we can get lost. Nature is also presented in fairy tales as a dangerous place, yet also a place where we must go to grow up. The mountaintop, the desert, the woods, and the wilderness each carry a metaphoric and mythic tone that the actual nature locations can truly convey. There's a reading in our hymnal from Ralph Waldo Emerson about roses. The transcendentalists were generally quite skilled at recognizing in nature the lessons for living well. "These roses under my window," Emerson wrote, "make no reference to former roses or to better ones. They are for what they are. They exist with God today. There is no time in them. There is simply the rose. It is perfect in every moment of its existence. This is so common a statement from naturalists and transcendentalists that it recurs in literature regularly. The world of nature, flowers, animals, waterfalls, these do not tax themselves with preoccupations and worries. One of the goals of Buddhist meditation is to become present to the moment, a task which is so simple for a dog or a bird or an infant, and so difficult for me and you. As Emerson said, the rose under his window is perfect in every moment of its existence. But we postpone and remember, he writes. We do not live in the present, but with reverted eye lament the past, or heedless of the riches that surround us, stand tiptoe to foresee the future. We cannot be happy or strong until we live with nature in the present above time. So, think back on a time when you were fully happy. Were you watching the clock, or was time flying as you were having fun? Think back to a time when you were fully happy. Were you multitasking, or were you fully present and enjoying the moment? Perfect in every moment of your existence, as Emerson would have it. Since I've already mentioned Henry David Thoreau, I'll throw in a quote from him as well. Nature never makes haste, he says. Her systems revolve at an even pace. The buds swell imperceptibly without hurry or confusion, as though the short spring days were an eternity. Why then should we hasten as if anything less than eternity were allotted for the least deed? The wise person is restful, never restless and impatient. So many examples from nature lead us to the conclusion that single-minded attentiveness is highly valued. So often, however, we hear appreciation and praise for multitasking as if multitasking is somehow better than being able to focus on one thing, as if having a fragmented attention is a good idea. Multitasking only gives the illusion of creating extra time. This and other behaviors like it work to divide our attention into too many directions. We are in danger of becoming fragmented as we do that. There's a little study that was done in Scotland a few years back. It was reported in the New York Times. I read an article, Easing Brain Fatigue with a Walk in the Park. Primarily, it was a test run for a portable EEG pack. And until this little device, any study of the brain activity had to take place in the confines of a lab, where the electroencephalogram machine could be used, patched up onto your brain, turned on, plugged in, and read the signals. Well, they invented a portable version that people can wear. And the electrodes are hidden beneath an ordinary cap, and the readings are sent wirelessly to a laptop carried in a small backpack. Thus configured, an individual could walk around town rather than sit in a lab. So one of the first experiments that the company did was to study the impact of different environments on a person's brainwave activities. They had volunteers walk in 3 distinct neighborhoods in Edinburgh. First in a historic shopping district with very little traffic, vehicle traffic at least, but plenty of sidewalks. The next was a park-like setting, and finally a busy, high-traffic commercial district. So it's no surprise, I'm sure, that the findings showed people were more meditative in the park-like setting and more frustrated in that busy setting. So this is not a dramatic finding. As I said, the primary goal seems to have been just to test run these portable EEGs. But still, I'll point out that the busy commercial and concrete settings, it was very demanding on the brain activity. Urban settings demand our attention. The commerce, the people, the traffic, we need to be paying attention to multiple things. The more natural settings allowed the brain activity to settle into what psychology is calling involuntary attention. This is using the word involuntary as in the biological sense. Automatic breathing and beating of our hearts is involuntary. We don't think about each breath, it just happens naturally. Our brains also have a default setting. This study corroborated the understanding by showing that the volunteers' brainwave activities went into that involuntary attention mode while in the park-like setting. In other words, people relaxed. The brain is still engaged, but the attention demands are effortless. The natural world holds our attention, but it allows us the freedom for reflection and contemplation. Another study, done many years back, reaches much the same conclusion. We seek out nature because we find that it's good for our spirits. It was a study about how children in elementary school playgrounds interact. They replaced 1.5 acres of asphalt with a diverse group of traditional playground swings and bars, structures and sitting areas, and a half acre of fishing ponds, streams, woods, and meadows. Then the researchers did a low-tech version. Rather than hooking anybody up with a portable EEG, they just watched the children to see where and how they played. As you might guess, the children spent more time with the ponds and the streams and the woods and the meadows compared with the traditional playground equipment. But more than that, the natural area of the playground saw wider ranges of activities and more mixing of the genders. The researchers also talked about how the kids would play, how the kids would play in the spaces. This is how the children described the natural area. That they said, it's a good place, really quiet. Lots of kids just sit around and talk. It's just perfect, one of them said. Children make themselves at home in nature when we let them. Ralph Waldo Emerson speculated that adults don't really see nature anymore. The sun illuminates only the eye of the man, but shines into the eye and heart of the child. Only illuminates the eye of the person, the adult person. Gendered language is hard sometimes. Emerson claimed that we come back to the woods when we come as children in wonder. Perhaps there is something about the single-mindedness here of which Thoreau had spoken. So in his essay, Nature, Ralph Waldo Emerson writes, "Standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air, uplifted into infinite space, all mean egotism vanishes. I become a transparent eyeball. I am nothing. I see all. The currents of the universal being circulate through me. I am part or particle of God." Or consider a different topography my colleague Marnie Harmony wrote in the meditation we had this morning. I say it touches us, that our blood is seawater and our tears are salt. I say that we must go down to the waves' trough and find ourselves, and then ride her swell until we can see beyond ourselves into our neighbor's eye. Or as our choir sang, we are children of the earth, nurtured in its hills and plains, fed by its sun, warmed by its sun, our green home in the universe. And John Muir said everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and give strength to body and soul. Wild places are necessary, for if we do not seek out wild places in nature, then we will not learn the gift they have to offer to the wild places in our hearts. And we will starve a sacred and necessary aspect of our living for want of wilderness. It is my balance, my taproot for spiritual health. Wilderness is the touchstone of my spirit. You go, seek out wild places in your life and in the world, for there is the preservation of all we hold dear. In a world without end, may it be so.